Thank you. Any other witnesses in support? You could just give your name, your affiliation.
Michael Young, California Labor Federation, also here in support.
Hang on a second. Let's get the microphone on and then repeat that, please.
Sorry, thank you. Michael Young, California Labor Federation, also here in support.
Thank you. Anyone else in support?
Norlin, on behalf of the California Faculty Association, in support.
Thank you. Anyone else in support? Seeing none, opposition.
You guys get up and let. Sorry, you can. Let's go.
They can have two. We'll have two.
Okay.
Say two. Go ahead.
Ted.
You can have two.
You have three people speak.
Yeah. Get,
You have three people speak, just.
yeah. Get up and then if they ask questions, we'll sit down.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members. Alex Alanis with the California Bankers Association in opposition to the bill. So the bill still allows higher income and higher middle income folks to benefit from the reduction in wage garnishment. Even just looking at the charts that are available with respect to disposable income, not gross income, somebody with $50,000 in disposable income will still have their wage garnishment reduced to 18% from the existing 25%. Even if you have $40,000 in annual disposable income, that goes down to 15%. So we're still seeing people who have the ability to pay having their percentage reduced. We do not dispute nor do we disagree with the attempt to reduce the amount for truly lower income individuals, but to allow other folks with higher income and the ability to pay, they should not benefit from the bill. They should be able to pay back their creditors and still be kept at the 25% threshold. We would prefer to see a true hard cap on gross income. The median income in California is roughly $48,000 a year, something in that range, something at $50,000 in gross income at a hard cap, I think would be more acceptable to all of us, and you truly get to those folks who are lower income. With that, we still remain opposed to the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cliff Berg here on behalf of the California Association of Collectors. We remain opposed to the bill. We are digesting the amendments, so I want to compliment the author. I think he's trying to work with us to move this in the right direction. In fact, my client would probably agree with his sponsors regarding the examples that they use, that it is not our intent to go after those people. They would also add probably that we do not go after those people. So the real issue is our examples, which is the person making $150,000 a year who's juggling multiple car payments, lifestyle issues, and lifestyle choices, who chooses not to pay a legitimate debt that they owe. And I want to emphasize that what we're talking about here is wage garnishments. Wage garnishments are post-judgment tools to, in essence, enforce a judgment that was already obtained. So in a situation of wage garnishments, the collection agency has already reached out to the consumer 3 or 4 times, both by phone and through letters, over probably an 18-month period before they ever went to court. They then made a judgment to go to court to seek a judgment, and that judgment, that decision is based, in essence, on a triage. You don't go to court in California and incur upfront filing fees and all the other costs of legal services, in essence, to go after someone who can't afford to pay. You basically go to court because you believe there's an ability to pay. So a wage garnishment is post-judgment. You triage the case. That our industry basically calculates 98% of debtors assigned to a collection agency resolve their issue. We never go to court. 2% we go to court because we think that they have the ability to pay and there's a valid debt. We get a judgment. The court has validated the legitimacy of the debt. The debt is owed. We then contact the consumer repeatedly, both by phone and by letter, to try to work out a payment plan and, in essence, to work out a plan that works for the consumer. Only after all those efforts fail do we get a go for a wage garnishment. So you really have both thinned out low-income people who can't pay before you ever get to this stage. So sort of the crux of our issue with this bill at this point remains that it still gives relief to high-end debtors who are making lifestyle choices not to pay the bills that they owe. That drives up the costs for all other consumers, so you and I pay more for goods and services, in essence, if someone does not pay for goods and services that they took, because a small business person has to recover it somehow. Finally, the bill is retroactive the way we read it. We do not think it makes sense to go back to all the existing wage garnishments that are out there and try to change them, so we are very concerned about retroactive application about this bill. I mean, I think there is a deal to be had here if this bill truly does what the sponsor says it does and applies to low-income workers and low-income people, but that's not what the bill does at the moment.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good morning. My name is Sonia Gibson. I represent Encore Capital Group, and I'm here in opposition to the bill. I think with the recent amendments, it's a step in the right direction, but it's actually fairly misleading in terms of the formula that's being proposed. When you look at the new lesser of formula structure, and you look at what disposable versus gross income is, as well as next year's minimum wage, which is $10 an hour, not $9 an hour, you actually come to a situation where the lesser of formula Part 1 only kicks in for someone making $156,000 gross a year. And that's an estimate, but a conservative estimate at that. But what it's really saying is now you have a formula that the second component is meant to apply to low-income wage earners, and yet it applies to everyone up to $156,000 annual income, which we would not categorize as a low-wage earner. So I think there's something to be worked out. We'd like to see some application below a certain income level. I don't think $156,000 annual salary is that income level. I think it was noted in the past, $60,000 income is this much. That $60,000, again, we have to remember is disposable income, not gross. So a big distinction there. The way we are actually calculating is it shows someone making $120,000 annually could have as much benefit of $200 a month in garnishments under this proposal. So I think we need to look at the numbers very carefully. It's quite different when you look at the two distinctions. The second thing I want to address is that we're moving away from the big issue that we're trying to help low-income consumers. However, the bill will actually harm them by causing them to pay more in fees and interest. For example, for someone with a $3,000 debt making right above minimum wage, this bill is going to end up costing them $2,000 out of pocket extra on fees and interest. And most of that is actually a county fee that consumers pay out of pocket. So what's happening is when you're reducing the garnishment percent for someone each pay cycle, you're going to extend the number of garnishments that occur for them. And in doing so, you're now causing them to pay the $12 share of fee for a longer period of time and also incur interest, as was previously mentioned. So I'm a little perplexed at how we're helping consumers by adding $2,000 on a $3,000 debt. I think that the unintended consequences are actually pretty grave for consumers. We certainly don't want to harm our consumers. I think we agree that there's something to be worked out for low-income wage earners, but the bill as it's drafted will harm the low-income wage earners and also be able to provide a pretty steep, significant benefit for someone making up to $156,000 a year. Thank you.
Thank you. Other witnesses in opposition, if you could give your name, your affiliation.
Tim Lynch on behalf of DBA International, the nonprofit trade association representing the debt buying industry in opposition still, though we are encouraged by the discussion and the focus on low-income workers.
CJ Stolley here on behalf of PRA Group, and as currently written, we are opposed to this bill.
Mr. Chairman and members, Mike Belote for the California Creditors Bar Association. Nothing to add that hasn't already been said. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in opposition? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the committee. So for the opposition, when you came and talked to me about this bill, you were interested in tiering. We talked a little bit about that, although not in specifics. So I'm glad to hear that you feel that there's a deal to be had here, because I think that can go a long way to addressing the issue that you had about affecting the low-income workers. And so it's also good to hear that you think there's a deal to be had. which means that I think for a lot of members here, and what has often been articulated when there's a structure moving forward, maybe members will be agreeing to vote for it in this committee, but will have its eye on this bill with respect to what that deal is before it gets to the next step. So that's good. So, Senator, if you could address I think the three things that I really heard out of this and that we had talked about, the tiers and where you see that the high overall cost for the lowest wage workers, because if you are extending the time, reducing the amount that can be garnished and extending the time, they will be paying higher overall costs. The fact that the consumer advocates are here supporting the bill, I think, speaks more to the fact that for a low-wage worker, it's a matter of cash flow rather than overall debt. And then the retroactivity, that's not something that you had brought up. The opposition brought up with me before, but that was a claim that was made here, and perhaps you could address those.
It's an interesting claim, but on the tiering, so everybody knows, I've abandoned the 10% ratchet down. Under this bill, the garnishment wage or the garnishment remains at 25%, which is what the opposition wants. What it does is it graduates up to that based on what your income is. So whether there's a hard cap, I don't believe that the medium wage of California, when we start talking about minimum wages, you can live in a high-income area where the cost of living in the Bay Area is making a minimum wage in the Central Valley is much more conducive to surviving than it is in a high-income area where your cost of housing, your cost of travel is more expensive. This idea of the fees. I know that you folks have been briefed. The opposition, we did some research on part of the large fees are set on the fact that people are getting paid weekly. Because that was the calculation when they get to their number. Nobody gets paid weekly. We called up all the low income, all the McDonald's and those folks and the high end folks. Everybody's paying every 2 weeks. So the number that they've given you is inflated. The 10% that the interest that they charge is not necessary. They could waive the interest. If we've heard some, they want to work with the low-income workers. I have never seen anybody waive the interest, but they can do that. And the 12%, Assemblymember Garcia had a bill a couple years ago when we heard from the sheriffs about that was actually the cost, that was just reimbursement for them. So the chair is right, is that it comes down to, as people, when they pay their credit cards, they choose voluntarily to pay less than pay a higher amount. There's nothing in this bill that prohibits the garnished person from paying more. Even if I were to lower, if this becomes law, there's nothing for them to voluntarily pay their creditors more, which is the case right now. So as you get into whatever percentage you want to pick, 18%, 24%, a debtor could pay more voluntarily. So there's no prohibition. And
I would like to add to that answer. It was an excellent answer to the question. This is with regards to what are the costs to the debtor when the time period is extended. Remember that this law just prevents automatic seizure of income, right? It doesn't prevent somebody who is able to pay their basic needs then to come back and work out a deal if they can pay more. Just like somebody might pay more than the minimum balance on their credit card, or more than the minimum balance on their student loan if they can. This gives more options to the low-income worker, right? It gives them more options than they currently have today, which is 25% of of their income gets garnished after they go over the minimum wage. So it gives them more options, not less. Additionally, the other piece about extending the time period is that when people are unable to meet their basic needs, things go really wrong, right? They apply for public benefits, which is a toll on all Californians and the economy, right? And they tend to go into to banking and loan situations which are predatory. And because they have bad credit, they're forced to seek predatory loans and loans with higher interest rates. So they actually end up in debt longer. So this idea that we're lengthening the period of time that they're in debt because we're reducing the garnishment is actually not complete and comprehensive in the understanding of low-income families, which, when they're unable to meet their basic needs, rely on predatory loans. Thank you.
But, Mr. Chair, I'm working on it. I'm open to working with you and to the members here to if my chart needs a little tweaking to address major concern. I know I'm being how would I put this? Set up to be the $156,000 man here about wage garnishment only for letting the high-income people skirt. I didn't realize that was my goal when I authored this legislation and amended it, but I do want to work on those particular concerns that are raised by members of your committee and yourself.
And that's good. And the reality is that if you look at the spectrum of where most of the garnishments happen, it's within a particular range of income, and whether we're talking disposable income or gross income, I think there needs to be could be some clarification there. And sort of working at the extremes, I don't think this committee wants to give any additional benefit for somebody who is, as has been said, making lifestyle choices and just trying to avoid a debt, although in this case you are getting that debt payment. And it was very clear, too, that the garnishment as a tool when it's necessary, but it's also leverage in order to negotiate a better payment scheme, which is what I think everybody's talking about here. So it sounds like there's definitely room to move. Ms. Garcia.
Thank you. I want to thank the author and the opposition for the willingness to continue to work on this item and this formula. And I have serious concerns about the tail end of your curve, with that last quartile. And you're going to tell me that that's a small amount of minority folks, and fine, there is a tail end of a quartile, and so I get it. It is not the bulk of folks. And you're looking at adjusting. In this morning, I was speaking to Jessica about a different formula, maybe based on poverty measures and a multiplier factor there, where we see a clearer cutoff and it still adjusts with time and as different things adjust along the way. Is this something you're open to discussing as you're moving forward?
Sure.
And I'm sure, for reals, this is a good idea.
Right.
You hadn't thought about it, or have you thought about it and you didn't like it, so you decided to come up with this other formula based on your experience?
Well, I tried to address some concerns that were raised by you and by other folks. If we only focus on the person making $100,000 and we say now under your bill they're going to be garnished at 24% versus 25% because the formula changes. Okay, I'm more concerned on the lower end. So if I'm
concerned on everyone personally, and that might change 10 years from now, but today I'm concerned of everyone making above $70,000. So I just expanded that tail end for you, actually. It's not just the $156,000. I think of a multiplier factor of poverty times 2 gets me close to that 70,000, and there's space of whether 2 is the correct multiplier or not. I'm not trying to get you to agree with that, but my concern is much more than just the 156,000 actually. And I think I'm not the only member here that has that concern, and so we need to take that seriously.
Well, I agree with you. The history on this is that the federal government suggested that when we started garnishing wages, that they came up with a formula of 25%. That's just a random number. And many states like California, once upon a time, adjusted it. And legislators have never had the discussion that we're having right now of whether that is a right effect. At $70,000, it's 21.4%. I see that there's concern. I will go back and.
A poverty factor multiplier is dealing with the population that we're talking about, the low income that we're really trying to help.
Right. But I'm just saying is that at the end of the day, if I'm making $70,000, I do get a garnishment. It's not 10% under the original bill. It's 21.4%. But I want to address your concern that if that's the sweet spot that I'm hearing from the committee that I need to make the adjustment on it, then I will. I'm not, at 21.4 to 25%. practically speaking, I don't know how much that means in the paycheck, but then maybe that's a better formula.
May I respond to that? So
No,
I didn't ask.
Only if asked the question.
Please.
I apologize. I'm looking at the numbers, and at $70,000, weekly garnishment is a benefit of $264 a month if we were to say biweekly, so half that. So it's hundreds of dollars a month at $70,000 under the current formula. So when you add that up across all creditors, all retailers, all garnishments, it does become a significant impact.
So let me ask you a question, though, because you came here saying that you want to work with the author, and I want to make sure that that's actually a real commitment and not just what we're saying here, since I've already got on his case. Let me get on your case, too. Let me be fair. And so when we're talking about things like factors of poverty factors, is that something that you honestly feel we could find a direction here, and it's not just telling me yes for the sake of, because I'm going to hold these just as accountable as him, that this is an honest attempt to really help these low-income folks, which at the end of the day, almost all of my constituents fall into this category. And so I need to stay true to that. And so I want to make sure that these are real commitments that we're getting here on your end.
I think we would be supportive of that concept of having this bill apply to 2 times the poverty level that you mentioned.
And I'm not committing him to 2 because I don't know if that's the exact number. But, okay. Well, I think for the sake of today, I think the discussion should continue. And so for today's sake, I will be supporting the bill moving forward, not that I love it in its current form, but I do hope that as this moves forward and we track it, you guys will find that sweet spot.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Ms. Gallagher?
Well, I appreciate that you're moving in this direction of trying to limit it, because I think, when we started off, it was 10% across the board, right? So, when that started out, we were talking about high wage earners, too, would get the same benefit. I think moving in the direction of really helping the working poor is important. And I think, Jessica, right, your point of, 70% of low-income people are living in working homes, right? That is a travesty here in California. So I think trying to work on something that hits that spot of we're trying to really help the working poor, which, when you first came to talk to me, that was really the impetus of what we talked about. I think that makes a lot of sense. But the other frustrating thing is, why are we always working on this end of things, like trying to limit wage garnishments, do minimum wage increases that really, they just get you this incremental benefit for the working poor. Meanwhile, it's still 70%. Why aren't we doing more to help increase jobs in this state that will help bring people out of poverty and give them a sustainable income level? And how many of you were in UNC yesterday to talk about SB 350 that's working its way through the legislature?
Mr. Gallagher, could we stay on?
But I'm just talking about, we're always working on this end of the spectrum, and we're not working on the top end of increasing jobs that help bring people into sustainable levels where they can provide for their families. But I don't hear the same people showing up to say, hey, SB 350 is going to put us behind the manufacturing job level.
Point taken, Mr. Gallagher, but can we talk about this bill?
It is about this bill, because it all relates to the same thing. We're talking about trying to help the working poor and bring them out of poverty. Meanwhile, they're paying more at the gas pump. They're paying more for all their cost of living expenses. And any incremental benefit we give them from a wage garnishment is going to be sucked up by those additional high costs of living that we have. So I'm just making the point that we need to work on both ends of the spectrum here. And I feel like we're really missing it on the top end that would really help a lot of the people that we're talking about today. So I would just encourage the same people who are talking about this to advocate on the other end as well.
Just
point taken. I didn't hear a question quite in there. Any other questions, comments? Ms. Wagner?
A couple of things quickly. Let me just state for the record, and perhaps the obvious that's not been said yet, but the argument that there's a disincentive to earning additional dollars if a large portion of them, or any portion of them, is going to go to a wage garnishment, is an argument that resonates very, very well with me. Frankly, it's the same one my colleagues on my side of the aisle make every time you guys come at us with tax increases. So it actually does resonate. I think there's something to it, and I appreciate the opposition. His willingness to work on the lower end where there may legitimately be a problem. That said, I was prepared to vote against the bill. It sounds like we're making some progress, and at this point, I'm going to certainly, not that my vote will be necessary, Senator, but
you never know.
But to help at least move this along while we continue to talk. But let me ask this of the opposition. We heard from the economics professor that this is a great deal for you guys because you get a guaranteed 10%, and you're getting more in fees. And what's your objection? What is your objection under those circumstances?
So, speaking on behalf of Encore, so the fees are not coming to us; it's going to the sheriff's office. But we actually do not charge interest. So, I think the senator mentioned that no one waives the interest. Our company does waive the interest. So we certainly don't want to see a situation where you're incentivizing creditors all of a sudden to charge that interest because now you're putting them in a situation where their garnishment amount is being reduced. I also want to comment that I think the argument that people are likely to pay more under this or still have the option to pay more under this garnishment structure, that's simply not true. We took a look at how many people actually pay more than what the amount they're being garnished, and we found 0 examples. So I don't think I think there's a situation where there's a negotiation process that happens, and companies like us certainly actually stop the garnishment and put those consumers on payment plans. But it's really it's a calculated formula. The sheriff receives a certain amount. The interest is actually mandated. It's a law under the state that 10% interest is allowed, and so I want to just make that clarification.
Okay. We prefer on delinquent accounts or closed accounts. We prefer just to finally have it paid off and close it, not want to keep it open over several years to continue to collect on it. They're no longer a customer. We prefer just to go ahead and close the account and then not deal with it anymore. But also, just respect to the fees. It's a 10% statutory fee. So, I mean, it's not something that we're imposing. It's something that's been imposed on the debtor.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is to resolve with the debtor a payment plan and resolve the amount owed as quickly as possible, keeping accounts open for a longer time and stretching it out. It doesn't pan out in terms of any benefit for us, and we really don't think there's people who volunteer to pay more than a wage garnishment. I mean, the whole reason they're in a wage garnishment situation was they were avoiding paying anything in the first place over a legitimate obligation that they didn't dispute. There's a judgment. They owe the money. They didn't respond to letters. They didn't respond to phone calls. And so, in essence, what this bill does is it reduces your ability to, recover the debt that's owed in a more timely manner. So I don't really see any incentive for us, but other than we are willing to be realists and work with the author on something that truly protects low-income people, who we don't see as in essence as being an industry target anyway, for recovering debt owed. The problem is the bill as written doesn't do that. So how we move the bill to the position where it does reflect what we've all talked about, I think, is the question.
And last, briefly, Ms. Bartholow, you look like you maybe have examples of debtors paying more, or, I mean, you clearly had some response to what we just heard. And I'll give you the courtesy of asking you the question.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Mr. Vice Chair, my point was that if the current law requires 25% garnishment, then it would make sense that under current law you wouldn't find people paying more than that, especially, and actually that point leads to our point, which is people can't afford their basic needs, so of course they're not going to be paying more than that. The second point is just to Mr. Burr's point. Possibly there are people who have the means to pay their needs, have a good time, make lifestyle choices, and avoid the debt. But the people, and I can really only from my personal and professional life speak to low-income families' experiences. I would prefer that we reference their inability to pay rather than their preference not to. These are families who can't pay. These are families who are in default because they didn't get the notice in the mail because they're not stable. They're moving all the time. Or they're unable to pay. They got a notice in the mail and they haven't opened it because they suffer from depression from their dire situations. These are the families that we see, and they're not avoiding a payment. They can't make a payment. And so if we can refer to these families and to debtors in ways that encompass the entirety of their situations, I think that would be more respectful.
Thank you. No more questions from the dais. I think everybody has a little bit of homework to do, and probably the easiest thing to work out, maybe not, but is formulas, and we seem to be working up a formula here. So that's good, and that gives me a lot of confidence that there is a deal to be had here and ability to move it forward and account for everybody's concerns here, and especially if you've heard from this body, Senator, that mostly interested in the low-wage workers who are less likely to afford it and not pushing them further into trouble. So with that, there's the motion. Can we get a second? And a second. And the motion is due pass as amended. Thank you. And Senator, you may close.
Well, thank you very much for the conversation. And as the amendments flush out, we're trying to strike that balance between ensuring that debts are repaid to creditors and then workers bringing them enough money to meet their basic needs and not fall behind on even more debts. And I urge an aye vote.
Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Stone?
Aye.
Stone, aye. Wagner? Alejo? Chow? Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Gallagher? Garcia? Aye. Garcia, aye. Holden? Aye. Holden, aye. Mainshine? O'Donnell?
Need 2 more votes. We'll put the bill on call.
Thank you.